everybody, Karen Roby here with Lance Whitney for Tech Republic. We're talking today about a recent ransomware case involving IBM and X-Force they were involved in. And Lance, this is interesting because there's a lot of different schools of thought, and people will weigh in differently when it comes to ransomware and what companies need to do if they fall victim. But particularly with this article and this particular incident, what we're finding is that sometimes it's not always a smart move to give in and meet the demands of the criminals.
Right, Karen. Yeah, so that's always a big question, obviously, if a business or an organization or a government agency or whomever it might be is hit with a ransomware attack, what is the right response? What do? Do they pay the ransom and hope that the files that were captured and encrypted are returned to them, or do they not pay the ransom and find some other way to try to get back their sensitive files? And there are a couple of schools of thought, obviously, about that. And it does vary. It does depend based on the organization and the type of files that were stolen. In this case, though, IBM X-Force, which is IBM's security arm, had a recent case where they were called upon to help a customer resolve a ransomware attack. And to cut to the chase, this is a prime example of why organizations and businesses should not automatically pay the ransom as their first course of action. So what happened in this case is this company had been hit with a malware infection leading to a ransomware attack. X-Force was called in. What they found was that this company's servers had been, the servers that had sensitive files and documents, each of them had a note on them indicating that they were attacked by ransomware. The notes indicated what files were encrypted. They indicated how the company should pay the ransom. So at that point, wisely, the organization called X-Force to come in and try to help them recover from this attack. And what X-Force did is they analyzed the encrypted files, they analyzed the malware infection, they analyzed the ransomware, and what they found is that there was no intention of decrypting the files, even if the ransom were to be paid. So they determined this by actually smartly analyzing the code behind the ransomware. And the code indicated that there was no possible path in the programming to decrypt the files under any circumstances. So what is still unknown is whether that was intentional on the part of the attacker, or was this sloppiness on the part of the attacker, because the code itself was actually lifted from another site. The attacker apparently didn't have the intelligence or the savvy or the resources to create their own ransomware attack from scratch. So they just begged, borrowed, and stole somebody else's code to launch this attack. So we don't know if this was intentional or accidental, but in the long run, one of the lessons learned here is that it's not necessarily a good idea to pay the ransom right off the bat.
Yeah, as evidenced in this one, they wouldn't have been any better off had they paid it. So Lance, what does the company say in terms of X-Force giving any advice to companies to help defend against this type of attack?
Protecting yourself against ransomware is really twofold. Number one, and most importantly, is you want to take the necessary precautions before you're a victim of ransomware. You have to kind of think of a question, not if I will be hit by one of these attacks, but when I might be hit by one of these attacks, especially if you have sensitive files, sensitive data. So one of the things that X-Force recommends is that you deploy basic security patching and an email security gateway to try to prevent the initial ransomware emails from hitting your organization. And what they talk about specifically in this case is to try to protect yourself from spear phishing attacks. And spear phishing attacks are a type of phishing attack that are directed against specific individuals or specific roles within an organization. And quite often, ransomware attacks will start with these kind of spear phishing campaigns that will hit an individual and try to get that individual to uh, uh, give up login credentials or other kinds of account information that gives the cyber criminal the means to access the files and decrypt them. So that's one good piece of advice beforehand. The other piece of advice that X-Force has is afterwards. If your organization does get hit with a ransomware attack, first off is don't just automatically pay the ransom. It's a good idea to contact some type of incident response company like X-Force, or there are certainly many other companies that are in this line of work. So it's a good idea to contact one of them. Don't feel that you're in this alone and you have to handle it by yourself. It's best to turn to an expert who has experience with ransomware attacks and can fight on your behalf. And in this case here, X-Force, as we said, they were able to dig deep into the code, find out what was happening, realize that there was no intention of decrypting the files. Beyond that, the second thing X-Force was able to do is that they were able to decrypt the files themselves. So they were able to dig into the code, look at the type of encryption that was used, because in many cases, these types of ransomware attacks will use a form of encryption that can be decrypted, that can be resolved without having to go back to the criminals behind the attack. So really those two pieces of advice. Make sure you have the necessary protection beforehand, but if you do get hit by a ransomware attack, reach out to the right people. Don't automatically pay the ransom. Reach out to someone, a company that can help you and try to mitigate on your behalf.
All right, some great advice there for what can be a really trying time for an organization caught up in something like this. Lance, I know you've got a great article up there on Tech Republic, and we have much more information on ransomware and some other information for you to help navigate these waters. Lance, thanks for being with us, and thank all of you for watching us here today.